Richard.
Hi, Jim. Hi.
Congratulations on Mystify.
Thank you.
Which is, by any fair measure, an extraordinary, insightful, moving and pretty disturbing look at Michael Hutchence. I want to know how long you've been working on the film and what your reaction was when you first saw the locked cut of the film.
I answer the second question first. I feel nausea. It's like, because it's like, you know, you have to sort of give up a baby and you think you can do better. It's like the end of Schindler's List where he goes, I could have saved more, I could have done more. And so it's, when did I start? We started, you know, in filming. The very first interview I filmed was as a result of a drama script I was writing in the late 2000s about Michael, like in the model of Walk the Line or Bohemian Rhapsody type biopic with an actor playing Michael. And I started doing research interviews. And the first one I did was with Bono, and I thought, well, if we're going to do interviews, we may as well film it, much like you're doing here, and we may as well record it properly, and because you never know, the DVD extras, whatever. And that became a thing. We were doing that, I think, not long after INXS came through with one of their replacement lead singers, came through town, and I got to sit down with them, and then the band manager Chris Murphy, and all, you know, so we started building up a collection of interviews on camera around the time when the first Canon 5D appeared, because they gave such a great quality. And then the drama script evolved, and then we had kind of a few different issues. One of them was, you know, finding someone who could play Michael. And then we, in time, the Channel 7 mini-series appeared. And I kind of knew the producer of that, Mark Fennessy, through the fact that we met, because we both knew we were both doing dramas. And of course, the time frame of a TV mini-series was much faster and everything. And that did, to be honest, it did create issues with us, and because the miniseries got announced and it was going ahead and had the band's cooperation and everything, our distributor pulled out, to be honest with you, and that was really the sort of beginning of the end of the drama. Is that they kind of thought, well, why do a feature film now when this 4-hour miniseries is going to be there, and then we sort of transmuted from that path into looking at these interviews and thinking, you know, well, to be honest, getting someone to play Michael is very difficult, you know, to the level at which I knew him, you know, not just, it's kind of easy to get someone to imitate his mannerisms and all that, but that look in the eyes, that face, that, you know, that humility in his character, that sort of shyness behind the sort of the exterior was always going to be problematic. So I sort of came to the decision that there was no one better to play Michael than Michael himself, and that led us into, okay, that leaves us with an archival documentary. And then I sort of knew that I had a lot of archive, that I had, you know, as since my mother, who was both a historian and librarian in her profession, I sort of inherited her hoarding traits. So every time we'd made a music video back in the 80s, I would get the cans of film, as you can see downstairs, and store them in my attic, literally, you know, where I sleep, and there's an attic room there, and they would just the cans would stack up and they would get rusty, and, you know, and the labels would fall off. We didn't know what was in them and everything, and but I knew that I had all the outtake rushes and who knows what else there, And so I thought, well, that's going to be a huge, valuable source of archive in 16mm and 35mm, which is, way better than quality than the music videos I made back in the day, which were all transferred to PAL video, which now, as you can see from the film, looks pretty blurry, So I knew I had that. Then I think that the person that really got me off my bum to do something was Mandy Chang at the ABC. She arranged a meeting between us in Sydney, saying we'd made Autoluminescent, we'd made We're Living on Dog Food, we'd made Lynn Marie had directed In Bob We Trust, and we'd just sort of completed Echo Homo. We're in the middle of completing Echo Homo, and she said, what's next on your plate? And we were sort of not quite sure. And then she sort of said, well, why haven't you ever done a Michael Hutchence documentary? And I said, well, funny you should mention that. I've got all these interviews and I've got all this footage. And she said, well, come on. And we'll give you development money. And the ABC kicked in a bit of development money. Then Screen Australia matched it, and Film Victoria matched it, and those three funding bodies were the champions of the project at a very early stage, where we didn't really we didn't really have the funds ourselves to scan this footage and everything. So and then with their support, we pulled together a pitching trailer that we took to the AIDC, the Australian International Documentary Conference, about 4 years ago now, and that was the sort of start of the actual proper production funding. And then the BBC had a representative there, Kate Townsend, and they sort of jumped on it, and then they recommended I contact John Batzik, who was the Oscar-winning producer of Search for the Sugar Man and Project Nim, Listen to Me Marlon, and all those sort of things. And I mean, he was an icon. He was on the phone. We showed him the pitch trailer. He was on the phone straight away, and he suddenly got everyone to lift their investment. So Batzik's now involved. We got to give them serious money, and but just getting back to the start of the interviewing, the very first interview was 2009, the last U2 tour, and that was in Melbourne, and that was Bono, in a hotel room speaking to us, and so the production funds finally came through about 2 years ago now. So yeah, it was the first 8 years were unfunded.
So how did you react when you first saw the complete cut of the film, and how does that square with the purpose of the film? What did you want to achieve with the film? How close did you get? Well,
the reaction is it's a little bit disconnected to what I wanted the film to achieve. The reaction is one of relief, is one of a huge weight lifting off your shoulder. The process of making the film from the very start, but especially when we were trying to get it funded and we're trying to get all the bits together. I mean, I knew I had the interviewees, but trying to guarantee the music. The first question that any investor says is, do you have INXS music? We hear it's troublesome to get. And initially it wasn't so troublesome, and then it became troublesome because of creative problems, creative control and all that sort of stuff. So there was when I first saw the cut of the film that worked, there was a huge sense of relief that I've done it. I've achieved what I set out to do. Not so much that the film's as good as we could have made it, but we actually did achieve telling the story, and all the elements fell into place. Is it as good, or is it as what I set out to do? I think it does what I set out to do, but being a perfectionist or always wanting more, like I wish it was longer. I wish audiences' attention span in the cinema was longer, because part of me wants to do a 4-hour mini-series or 4-hour documentary, not a 4-hour miniseries. So part of me would could easily fill with the footage we have 4 hours, but that really tests people's patience. There was a lot of pressure from our producers and investors to make it under 100 minutes, and 95 was the mention. So I do find it's, from all the work and all the planning and all the archive, it's over far too quickly. But that's the nature of the marketplace.
But what's the intent of the film in terms of the public's understanding of Michael Hutchence? What did you want to address or correct or redress?
What I was trying to do with the actual film is a couple of things. One, I wanted to tell a unique and engrossing story that I'd actually been a witness to, but in the context of a known artist, Michael Hutchence, known in some countries more than others. I wanted to redress the legacy that was being left behind, which was pretty messy, I gotta say. Since the moment of his death, and the rumour, the scuttlebutt, the deliberately spread interviews in tabloid publications on it, there was all sorts of stuff out there that I just did not recognise.
And if I may be frank, one of them is that he killed himself during some bizarre act of autoerotic asphyxiation.
That's right.
Which comes up on the internet an amazing amount of times.
Yes, so and it's that concept is a butt of a lot of comedians' jokes. Michael Hutchence' name became synonymous with autoerotic asphyxiation, and I can't say that at the point of his death I was adamant that wasn't the case. I was very suspicious, but as we researched for this film, we found out that whole concept hadn't actually appeared until about a month after he died, and there was an episode of 60 Minutes, which I think the idea that he might have killed himself in a naughty trick or whatever, a naughty game he was playing, was a possibility for why he would leave his loving wife or loving partner and daughter that he absolutely loved, no question. But as we looked into even the time frame of that there was no evidence. We accessed the full 160-page coroner's report through dubious means, but we accessed it and we got it, and there was no hint of that in any of. There's no hint of a cover-up. It's very detailed, and the coroner's very clear. But I didn't need to know that because I knew it already on one level, because I am very close friends with Michelle Bennett, who was speaking to him 26 minutes before she was knocking on his door, and he was either unconscious or in the process of dying. Now, you don't sob on the phone and say, I need to see you, come and see me right now. You don't, and then decide to go off and have a naughty game in the 26 minutes that your ex-girlfriend, the major love of your life, is in a car rushing to you to get there, and you just don't do that sort of thing. Maybe earlier in the, when he was alone at 4 a.m. or something like that, if he couldn't sleep, but not at that point in time. It was a ridiculous concept. I'm not saying he didn't get up to mischievous things with people in the past, but the theory that's how he actually did it at that minute. And I saw him in not that this means anything really, but I was there in Sydney and saw him in the funeral home 24 hours later after we heard about it, and it was the whole concept of Michael's name becoming synonymous with autoerotic asphyxiation was just incredulous joke to me. And so when you'd see it, in the tabloid press, you'd see headlines in the Daily Mirror or whatever it was going to be, and you see comedians telling jokes, using his name as the butt of their jokes, and I just, said, look, there's a number of things this film's got to do, and one of them is got to try and set the record straight, not by manipulating the facts and sort of getting my theory across, but by researching it much like a detective would, you know. So I showed the coroner's report to neurologists and psychologists and suicide experts and smell and taste experts, and they, you know, the suicide expert was the most interesting one, because he basically looked at the coroner's report, which included the results of the brain scans and all those sort of things, and he said, look at this line, the line that's in the film. There's 2 walnut-size contusions, 2 walnut-size areas of brain damage in his frontal lobes from an accident or from an event of 5 years earlier. And he said, I can tell you what, that puts him in immediate risk of suicide. That raises your risk. Then he said, look at the level of alcohol in his blood. He said, that's a factor of suicide. It's almost every suicide victim, and this guy had spoken to thousands of them. You know, thousands of suicide attemptees, not it's hard to speak to them once they're dead. But and alcohol is a recurring theme, high levels of alcohol. The other recurring theme is in suicide attempts is lack of sleep. Michael, you could see from the phone records, you could see from his activities both in rehearsal and the phone records on the hotel room that he hadn't slept in over 36 to 48 hours beforehand. You know, he'd been awake every 10 minutes, you know, there's something was going on via the phone or in a rehearsal. So, you know, the psychologist sort of rang me like, you know, was in the middle of the night. I was working here, and he was going, I've just read this coroner's report, and I'm surprised no one has picked up on this, but he was a perfect storm for being a high-risk suicide person. And he cited those 3 things. And then, in the process of researching and filming the interviews, we discovered that girl at the end who said, you know, and the reason why she's there, not just because he was having an affair at the end of his you know, close to the end of his life, she said, we discussed suicide. I thought he was a prime candidate for suicide, and he used to, as you hear in the film, and he used to tell me not to worry, you know.
It was another purpose of the film to tell everyone the enormous impact the happenstance had on his life. The whole thing about the Copenhagen taxi driver.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
Right.
Was it general knowledge? Did you know about it?
Oh, well, the close friends knew about it, and there was always this sort of nefarious sort of, not nefarious, but there was this sort of dubious version, because he did tell a few people, and I think it's even dealt with in the mini-series, but not the actuality, because for the first time, Helena, who was the only witness to this accident, told me exactly what happened, or told us and me. She never had spoken to me about it before. People had heard it second and third hand via Michael. Like, Michael had told me about a bump on the head that he got that robbed him of his taste and smell. But he was very dismissive of the actual event. He didn't tell me, by the way, there was blood coming out my nose and ears. So Helena sat there in a dark studio telling me, saying, I've never told this story, I've never, you know, he made me swear to silence. I wasn't even allowed to tell my parents. And told this story about what happened that night. And it was such an un-rock and roll story. It wasn't, you know, he was riding his motorcycle too fast, or he was doing a James Dean, or he's being drunk and coked or whatever. He was literally eating a slice of pizza, and as you say, happenstance. And this situation, this assault happened to him. And basically, he fell on, you know, and he cracked his head, and there was a huge reaction to that in his life afterwards. And I don't think that had ever been shown in the full seriousness and the full context of what it actually meant. I think people had been told, oh, I had a bump on the head, and like even you see in the interviews in the film where he discusses it, oh, this happened, I talked in tongues for a while, but it was a good thing, it sorted me out,
Can you just briefly describe your special relationship with INXS and with Michael, and how they gave you special access to material?
Well, basically, I started making videos with them in 1984, immediately after I'd just completed my first feature film, Strikebound. And along the way, I'd made a Hunters and Collectors video, Talking to a Stranger. And that suddenly, both with people like U2 and INXS and Jimmy Barnes, and everyone started ringing saying, I'll have one of them. Thanks. And literally that's what happened. The INXS manager in 1984 rang and said, let's do a song together, and it was Burn For You. And in the process of that, we travelled from Mackay in Queensland to the Cannes Film Festival to London to finish it off, and from there on in we just kept working together, including What You Need, that Lynn Marie directed and I produced, and then Need You Tonight and all, so you kept meeting up at key points every 3 to 6 months over those years. You kept meeting up and spending an intense time together. It might be a week, it might be just a couple of shoot days, and then you'd at stage there I was in London for about 3 or 4 months doing a film for Pete Townsend, and Michael and Michelle were living in London at that stage, and so we just, we knew each other, we'd hang out in London, and I'd take him to see birthday party gigs, and and he'd get to be sneered at by Nick Cave, and that was the best experience he'd ever had, he reckoned. And then he became friends with Nick Cave 10 years later and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, and the band, Michael, began to trust me, and all the friends began to trust me as a friend who wasn't going to do the dirt, especially after he passed away, wasn't going to do the dirty, he wasn't going to sell the story. So the band trusted me. Helena and Kylie and Michelle, they all did their interviews talking to someone they knew and trusted, I mean, Michelle, I kept a friendship up with over the years and worked together with a lot because she became a film producer. Kylie I hadn't seen for, and maybe 20 years since she dated Michael. And so meeting up with her was like a reunion again. And then by the end of the interview, she totally trusted me with her footage. And Rhett and Tina, the brother and sister, knew me, and there was that element of trust there, and I think that was sort of what enabled people to spill the beans in a way on their very close and intimate memories with Michael, without being scared it was going to be on the next episode of the Today Show or something, without, just knowing that it was going to be handled delicately. They also had the opportunity to look at their sections of the film and make changes, and no one really did. And, I think Helena was the most nervous, probably quite understandably, because she was worried a bit how the fans would react to, why didn't you do more after the accident? But, as she said, she was a 22-year-old girl and had just met Michael, and she was off doing her modelling career, and he was the big rock star saying, I'm okay, don't worry,
You filmed all of these interviews, but you only used the audio.
Yes.
Why?
Well, I'll just correct you, I filmed half of the interviews, and halfway through my interview process of about 60 people, I stopped filming because I realised that I was never going to use their talking heads. And the first realisation of that was when I made the pitch trailer that I was telling you about and showed it to the AIDC conference. And I sort of there's some very prosaic reasons that, the film's only 100 minutes, and I didn't want to fill it full of 20 minutes of other people talking heads. I wanted to, as people talked, to see the subject of what they were talking about, whether it was literally or doing something else totally, or with a look on his face or the expression. But the fundamental, the filmic reason was I wanted to create not just a documentary that was a filmmaker saying, I'm going to take you back and show you about this story that happened 20 years ago. I wanted to create an immersive experience that took you back in time and surrounded you with the sounds and the images of this time. So and you're going to get looked at like you were the person behind the camera, that you were his brother or you were his sister or you were his girlfriend. You were going to be the recipient of that direct contact with Michael. And that's one of the reasons we made it in CinemaScope, in that format, that we spent extra money and got Atmos sound, if you're lucky enough to see it in an Atmos cinema, you'll hear a maze, when the Wembley crowd roars, it'll be all around you, and all the music and reverberation is all around you. And I wanted to take you back there to the late 70s, to the 80s, to the 90s, and experience it, not just have a talking head saying, oh, this happened back then. And I also didn't want people sort of looking at the aging process of the talking heads and saying, oh, they haven't done so well, or oh, she's well preserved, or
it takes away the distraction of the talking head.
Absolutely,
it worked really well.
There was sorry, just on one more thing. There was it's gone out of my mind. Okay.
When it comes back, I'll let it
yes.
Don't worry. Did you approach Bob Geldof?
Yes, I approached Bob Geldof not so much to be in it. I approached him because I wanted him to be aware that we were making the film, and I wanted him to be secure that we weren't actually going to do yet another hatchet job, and we weren't tabloid, broadcaster doing a documentary, that I was going to sort of try to get to the bottom of what happened. But I certainly wasn't up for vilifying Paula or exploiting Paula's troubles at the end of her life, and so I contacted his management, and they were so sort of complimentary, saying, "Oh, you're the first film crew that's ever contacted us before the event to make us." I'm saying, I'm keen to show you at the end, so you're aware of what's going to be in the film and everything. But ultimately, we didn't show them. We showed Tiger Lily, and at the stage of the edit, actually before we actually even got approval from INXS, I flew to London with a laptop and showed Tiger Lily the film, and she loved it and gave it her support, and basically said, I'll do everything I can to try and get you the music, And so that was an interesting thing, is that of why the story became so narratively structured, is that we actually cut it without INXS music, and so we, out of necessity, but it turned out to be a really good exercise, because we sort of told the story of Michael the person, and then when Tiger wrote her email and said, I've seen it, it's all good, we then were able to insert the INXS songs we were able to license, and sort of structure the music around the narrative, rather than letting the music be the narrative or sort of swamp the narrative. So it was quite an interesting way of doing it, and you can sort of see that at the end, that the story is strong through not only through his life, but through the sort of organic editing process that the three of us here had, and it was, it may look deceptively easy, the editing, but it was very complicated in what to leave in, what to take out, what to, it's it's not always fast editing and all that stuff that is editing itself. It's sometimes it is what you leave out and what you, yeah.
Is it true that you gave Michael Hutchence the video camera that he shot all that footage with?
Not the video camera, the 16mm Bolex camera, which I still have mine in there, but I don't know where he's ended up. But that's he basically saw the camera we took to Mackay for that first video, and I kept bringing it as a second camera to all the other video shoots. So sometimes, we've got behind the scenes footage of Lynn being the third camera. We'd have two main cameras, and Lynn would be there winding up the 16mm camera and shooting these little 100-foot rolls. So he would love the look of that Bolex, and the Bolex was Burn For You was basically shot on a Bolex, and just to explain, the Bolex has no motor. It's a clockwork camera. So he would say, I want one of those. And so one of my trips back then to LA, there was this great antique camera store in LA, which is quite well known, and I would go there, and I think it was $600. I bought him a Bolex with the case and everything, and a whole pile of film. And he, for the period there, around the Kylie time, around when he could afford. No, actually, we bought it. I don't think he ever paid us back. So, but when he could afford to get 16mm processed, so he would have all these little rolls of yellow Kodak film, and he'd thread it up in the camera and film it like a Super 8 home movie, but it was 16mm. So unbeknownst to me, Kylie, I'd totally forgotten about that, and Kylie reminded me, say, on our first date, he had this clockwork camera and he was filming us on the first date. And I'm going, I remember that camera, I bought it for him. And it's going, yeah, but where's the film? And and I was just, knowing the mess around his estate and all that, I just was going, well, that's all gone, so it's probably in a vault somewhere, it's never going to be seen. And then when production started, and we got all the tins of film out from my attic and sent them off to Ray Argall, who scans and who did that Midnight Oil film. And Ray bought himself a scanner, so we could scan everything without worrying about huge bills and everything. He gave us a very good rate. And so Ray rings up and says, do you realise there's all this footage I've just scanned of Michael and Kylie on a boat? And I'm going, are you kidding me? And it's all come out of my attic. Michael must have brought it into one of our shoots and handed me all these yellow boxes, and I just put it through with the job and forgot about it. And it just been sitting in these tins in my attic with that labelled Max Q or INXS or whatever it was labelled. And I hadn't known it was there until Ray rang. And on top of that, Ray didn't think anything, so he didn't tell me. I see the boat footage was fantastic, but then there's all this footage of Michael recording the Max Q album, which, there was about 5 stills of that. And so that whole section was really, I was sitting there going, how am I going to tell the Max Q story? We got no footage. And so it's like a, gift from heaven, and suddenly there's not only Kylie on the boat when their first date, but there's 20 minutes of Michael and Ollie and all those Melbourne reprobates filming, recording Max Q. And so I'm going, this is something weird's happening here. It's all just falling from the sky,
Final question, and it's a very unfair question, and it's the hardest question that I'm going to ask you. And I'm going to ask you to give it to me in a nutshell. But how would you characterise the impact of INXS and Michael on pop music in Australia, and I guess globally as well, but is there a way you can characterise what impact they had?
I think INXS, there has been obviously big Australian successes overseas before, and AC/DC is one of the biggest ones, but I think INXS had this remarkable combination of an internationalist sound and an Australian sound, without being too overtly, Land Down Under or The Angels or Barnsey Rock and Roll, which is, I'd say, uniquely Australian sound that may have a lot of trouble relating overseas. You know, it's not going to roar up the charts. Whereas INXS had this kind of, partly helped by Michael's English accent, from Hong Kong English accent, but it had this internationalist feeling to their music, to their lyrics, to their hooks, you know, and it was and the production of their music, you know, the fact that they very early on got in people like Nick Launay who'd mixed or who'd produced Public Image Limited, you know, and then they got in Chris Thomas, who'd actually produced the Sex Pistols, and also Pink Floyd, and he produced the White Album with the Beatles and everything. So the fact that they actually got these people in and said, can you take our music out there to the world? But also their music didn't sound, you know, it sounded like it could be English, it could be, you know, it could be English New Wave, but they're not quite, you know, they're not really Duran Duran. But then there's blues and there's funk in there as well, rhythm and blues and funk, part of the music. So it's very, you know, as you see in the film, when Michael goes through his influences, it's not pub rock and AC/DC and, you know, and all the easy beats or anything. It's basically, you know, Aretha Franklin and what's the one they did, the Ray Charles and all these great, and Mark Bolan, and you see all these internationalist influences he's going in. It's David Bowie even, and I do believe it broadened the parochial nature of Australian music, whether or not the Australian music was successful overseas. Like, you know, Men at Work were obviously successful overseas, but they're proudly waving the flag, like literally. And even AC/DC is, you know, you listen to them now and you can hear the roots of their Aussie pub rock heavy metal, you know, like a lot of it, you know, you can see the connection to the Angels and everything. And I find INXS to, you know, it had a universal quality, you know. You could dance to it, you could sing to it. It had the hooks, you know, and you know, I mean, I wasn't. One thing I forgot to mention, I wasn't a huge fan when they called me up and said, "Let's do Burn For You." But after meeting Michael and actually, you know, seeing them perform, and even hearing a lot of their dance mixes and everything, I actually, you know, it sort of did become my kind of music.
What's next?
Next, holiday. We're all having a holiday. But you know, we've got a few projects. We're interested in doing some drama again. You know, if that becomes possible. I mean, part of the reason we went into documentary is the funding of our kind of drama, with the death of independent cinema, really became very, very difficult, because we don't make strictly ballrooms here or mainstream cinema. So, you know, our films are proudly independent cinema, and the box office independent cinemas plummeted, so the pre-sales plummeted, so funding them is incredibly difficult. But there's a few things. There's a discussion of about the Billy Thorpe book, Sex and Thugs and Rock and Roll. I'm interested as a drama, and there's a couple of other documentary music-based documentary projects.
Just quickly, can you just for a moment just unpack what you just said, the death of independent cinema in Australia?
Yes, I believe that pretty much at the box office, the fact that people don't go to see independent cinema, not just Australian, but art house cinema, the box office receipts at art house cinema in the last 5 to 10 years, predominantly due to the internet, have plummeted. And so when you go to those distributors, you know, who specialise in those kind of films, be they Transmission, Madman, or there's a number of them, and you say, can you help us out with the financing package? You know, can you put up $100,000 so that Screen Australia get enthused enough to give us the rest or whatever? they just say we're not going to make 100. It doesn't matter if your film, you know, unless you win the lottery of the filmmaking lottery, and your film's not going to make $100,000 back for us, you know. So we can't put that, we can't guarantee that. So the what they call the minimum guarantees that they can put into the finance plan, you know, over the last decade, I would say, have gone from, you know, we regularly would get 150,000 against Australia put in, and have gone from that to, you know, maybe 30,000, maybe, or, you know, you're lucky now to get anything at all. A lot of distributors will say, we'll take your film on, but we can't give you any money. It's just like, you know, because we're not sure we're going to get our prints and advertising back. And so it means that if you're going out there with an Australian script that's a little bit different, you know, yes, you've got to be commercial, but the whole idea of being commercial now is, you know, it's only mainstream or nothing, you know, and so you can't so it's incredibly hard to get anything that's a little bit left of centre funded, you know. You can get bland comedies funded, you can get, or slapstick, not bland, but slapstick comedies. You can get, you know, you can get family movies funded, like Women in Black or whatever, things you can take Granny to. Muriel's Wedding type things can get funded, but they're all risk as well. You know, it's like you can't just pull a Muriel's Wedding out of thin air. It's but it's very difficult to get, you know, it would be impossible to get Dogs in Space funded now, and it would be impossible to get He Died with a Falafel in His Hand. But at the time they were made, it was extremely easy, you know.